GM. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Welcome to How to Write Good and the Importance of Technical Writing. My name is Evan, but online I go by the pseudonym Ichigo. I'm a self-taught developer interested in all things blockchain, cybersecurity, and smart contracts. But I wasn't always like this. For a long time, I thought I'd be off at law school by now. I attended the top school in my country, received straight A's, and completed an honors Bachelor of Arts with a double major in history and criminology. That's a roundabout way of me saying I'm a book nerd. I like to read and write a lot. And I joined Helius as a developer experience engineer over a year ago, making me a dinosaur in the crypto space. I've become the resident blog guy, authoring some of the larger, more prolific articles on FireDancer, Anchor, Agave client updates, stake-weighted quality of service, and zero-knowledge proofs. At Helius, the overarching question that the developer experience team is trying to answer is, how can we improve Solana's developer experience? It's a very simple question that can be hard to answer at times. What's the current state of DevX on Solana? What are the biggest pain points? Which one should we tackle first? How should we tackle it? Why should we prioritize this issue over another? When I first joined, the most pertinent issue that we found at Helius was a lack of good resources. Resources like the Solana cookbook and official documentation are nice as an initial starting point, but they're lacking in some respects. Solana suffered from a knowledge gap. There were a lot of good beginner resources and a few excellent niche deep dives into more advanced topics. But there wasn't too much in the middle. How can we expect developers to go from Hello World to creating ZK circuits? Moreover, a lot of these resources assumed a great deal of knowledge. For example, I was tasked with writing a deep dive on compression. I went, okay, but the average front-end dev or technically interested user would have no idea what a concurrent Merkle tree is. And to understand concurrent Merkle trees, you need to understand cryptographic primitives, hash functions, what makes up a good hash function, hash pointers, hash chaining. Now we can finally start talking about Merkle trees, and then concurrent Merkle trees. This is a lot to assume from the average reader when we lack good educational content. Chewing glass isn't conducive to Solana's DevX long term. We need to establish baselines and address this knowledge gap. Naturally, the Helius blog was a good starting point. Here, we can provide written content on a variety of Solana-specific and blockchain-related topics. The blog's goal isn't necessarily to attract page views and investors. It is to provide value to the developer community. It is meant as a permanent reference. The issue with apps such as crypto zombies is that they're ephemeral. You're only meant to go through them once, and it's very hard to go back and reference certain topics without going through entire levels. We need something that people can control F, be indexed by search engines, or fed into AI. Once we establish a baseline with written content, we can expand upon it with more interactive and innovative content. Now we can create the crypto zombies of Solana. We can create different CTFs. We can start closing the knowledge gap and onboard the next million devs with good documentation and good educational resources. I've been putting a lot of emphasis on good resources. Written content can be extremely valuable for some and extremely boring for others. The goals of this talk are twofold: to explore what makes a good piece of written content, as well to explore the importance of technical writing. A resource should not be made for the sake of making a resource. You need to be intentional with your word choice and your intended audience. What content are you trying to cover? Are you giving a high-level overview or a comprehensive deep dive? Are you being comprehensive for the sake of being comprehensive? This talk will help clear up those questions. To create compelling technical blockchain content, you need to possess a wealth of knowledge in a number of related areas. Read widely, whether that be technical deep dives, economic analyses, coding tutorials, or even classical literature. This will expand your knowledge base and provide a rich reservoir of examples and concepts you can draw upon. Narrative techniques from fiction can make technical explanations more relatable, or insights from economic literature, for example, can illuminate why certain incentives exist. You need to be reading. The more you read, the more you'll be able to identify what makes good writing. Exposing yourself to diverse styles will sharpen your own. Each genre will contribute to developing a flexible and engaging writing style. This adaptability is necessary for technical writers, who are tasked with making complex information accessible to varied audiences. The importance of seeing how different authors tell stories, use examples effectively, and logically structure their arguments cannot be understated. Reading fosters a sense of curiosity. It forces you to explore unfamiliar concepts, question assumptions, and seek knowledge. I love reading. Keeping up with the latest Solana research and crypto more broadly is invaluable to me in my content. For fiction, whether it be Hemingway, Vonnegut, Christie, or Orwell, I enjoy diving into a good book. And speaking of George Orwell, I highly recommend him. Thought Crime, Doublespeak, 2 + 2 = 5. Orwell's 1984 is one of my favorite books. As a history nerd and a blockchain maxi, this cautionary tale on the dangers of totalitarianism, mass surveillance, and the importance of freedom of expression really piqued my interest. After reading it, I started to look more closely at Orwell's work, and I came across an essay published in 1946 titled Politics and the English Language. This essay criticized the ugly and inaccurate written language of his time, and the link between oppressive ideologies and the debasement of the English language. Politics aside, his criticisms of bad writing is worth exploring. He outlined 6 rules for good writing. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. Never use a long word where a short one will do. If it's possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Never use the passive where you can use the active. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. These aren't the only rules on good writing, nor should they be taken as law. However, they offer a really good baseline for us to look at content and determine whether it is well written. A figure of speech is supposed to be evocative. They're supposed to make you visualize certain imagery and help with understanding specific concepts. Nowadays, they've become worn out, devoid of their original meanings. Phrases like fishing in troubled waters or Achilles' heel are overused. They have lost their evocative power and have become lazy cop-outs for people disinterested in crafting their own phrases to accurately explain something. Be original in your word choice. Be direct. Write descriptively. Use figurative language only when necessary. For example, don't say someone was a pig at dinner. Use words such as gluttonous or greedy. Say they devoured their food. He was a pig at the table versus gluttony consumed him. He devoured his food, stuffing his face with mouthful after mouthful. The latter paints a more vivid picture. Naturally, you could argue that the metaphor, albeit satisfactory, still describes the man and his etiquette at dinner in fewer words. There's a fine line between being descriptive and overly descriptive. And of course, this warrants a discussion on simplicity. While preparing for this talk, I came across the linguistic stack exchange. One of the questions posed was, what are the minimum number of words needed to express any complex thought? Naturally, this led to a discussion of languages. And if you think about it, English is bizarre. It has a number of weird pronunciations and grammatical inconsistencies. It draws from Latin, French, German, and Old Norse. It's constantly changing. And yet, it is a very simple and precise language. For example, you can't find a replacement for the words for, giraffe, salmon, kaleidoscope, or centimeter. In technical writing, where concepts can be complex and specialized, the importance of precision cannot be overstated. Precise language promotes clarity. It engages with the reader. It reduces the need for lengthy explanations and explaining the same concept multiple times. How are you describing your product in your press release? Can you articulate your $1,000,000 idea to a bunch of TradFi investors in Patagonia vests? Will the average front-end dev lose interest in reading your blog article? Are you talking about hashing or encryption, blockchains or distributed ledger technologies in general? Writing needs to be accessible and understandable to the average reader without unnecessary complexity. The idea here is that we are trying to simplify, not to the point of oversimplification. Instead, we want to distill them to their essence, make these ideas accessible without compromising their integrity. Don't use long words when short ones will do. Don't use unnecessary words either. Shorter, independent clauses are often clearer than long-winded, complex sentences. They're punchier and more engaging. The death of clarity is insincerity. Speak truthfully and accurately. Weasel words colloquially refers to words or phrases that avoid being forthright. Think of a politician giving what seems to be a clear answer to a question, but when you look at what they've really said, there's no substance. This is very prevalent in marketing. Think of words such as virtually, fights, helps, or refreshes. Take the following sentence. Listerine fights bad breath. Here, Listerine only fights bad breath. It doesn't stop it. However, the way it's worded makes you think otherwise. Or the phrase, researchers say. What researchers? Link the specific article. Add a citation. Using specific words or phrases to give the impression that something meaningful has been said when you're actually making vague, irrelevant, or ambiguous claims is not conducive to technical writing. Be direct. While advocating for being direct and precise in your writing, we need to be careful using jargon. Jargon refers to specific words or phrases that are used by certain professions or groups and are hard for others to understand. For example, lawyers are notorious for overusing jargon. Prima facie means at first glance. Alimony means money paid to a dependent spouse. Res judicata means an issue that has been decided by the court. Sure, these explanations are longer. However, you're not alienating readers and making them confused. Be mindful of who your target audience is. We don't want to overload technical documents with jargon. This raises the barrier to entry for understanding Solana-specific concepts or products. The goal is to onboard people, not confuse them. Even readers who are familiar with the content can be confused by jargon, especially when used incorrectly. Using jargon does not make you sound smarter. Also, don't use abbreviations without explaining them. Someone new to blockchain will have no idea what MEV is. Explain it briefly or link to another article that explains it in more depth. This also interlinks with our previous section covering weasel words. For example, when giving a performance review, don't say the employee is a needle mover. Clearly articulate what they've accomplished. The same goes for a press release or a blog article. Keep it simple and be direct. To be direct is to write actively instead of passively. When the active voice is subject, performing the action, Jerry knocked over the lamp sounds a lot more engaging than the lamp was knocked over by Jerry. Or the system displays an error versus an error message is displayed by the system. This is because there's a direct connection between the subject and the action. This helps with retention, which is important with technical writing, as the content can traditionally be dense or challenging to navigate. It also tends to be more concise. Brevity is very important for technical writing, as efficient communication helps with sustaining interest. For documentation specifically, Procedures and instructions need to be understood unambiguously. The active voice makes it clear who is performing a certain action or process. It also clearly outlines who is responsible. While the active voice is preferred, be mindful of situations where the passive voice is preferred. For example, when the doer is unknown, irrelevant, or extremely obvious, then it's not 100% necessary to use the active voice. Incorporating the active voice, though, in technical writing helps make content more effective and accessible. Emphasizing the importance of active constructions facilitates clear, concise, and engaging communication. This is crucial for explaining complex technical content and encourages these aforementioned best practices in our writing. Orwell's last rule is a powerful call to pragmatism and the art of writing. It suggests that clarity and humanity should prevail over the rigid adherence to formal conventions. With respect to technical writing, this is particularly salient. It guides writers to prioritize the reader's understanding and engagement above all. Sometimes effective communication transcends these rules. Sometimes you have to use jargon. You may need those long-winded explanations. Sometimes the passive voice offers a clearer perspective, especially when the action's recipient is more relevant than its initiator. The dense nature of technical subjects might necessitate creative linguistic strategies, such as metaphors or simplified explanations, which, although rule-breaking, significantly enhance comprehension. Sometimes employing a conversational tone or first-person narratives for tutorials or blog posts can make the material more digestible. So, why go through the bother of mentioning all these other rules? They provide a nice baseline for identifying good writing, but to be great, sometimes you need to innovate. You should not deviate from these rules for the sake of it. You should only break these rules when it makes sense to deliberately enhance the learning experience or humanize your content. The overall goal of Orwell's writing rules is to convey ideas in a way that is both accessible and engaging. A technical writer's allegiance isn't to the rules themselves. It is to the authentic and effective communication of ideas. Now, we're going to switch over and start analyzing some of the content I've written to see what works and what doesn't. My writing style is often verbose. I like complex sentences. I come from an academic background where I'm used to introductions spanning multiple pages. I often make very nuanced post-structuralist or meta-theoretical arguments, the upper echelons of nerdy writing. I also like being descriptive, using words, regardless of whether they're common or uncommon, to capture certain ideas or specific emotions. This isn't always useful for technical writing, and now I've started to use shorter, punchier sentences. These kinds of sentences are more straightforward and easier to follow. For example, this is the introduction for a university paper I wrote on fascism. Fascist views, ideals, and actions can be seen in terms of pragmatism under the analytical lens of totalitarianism rather than in a binary of revolutionary or reactionary. This binary is dangerous as its rigidity spurts suprahistorical impulses to group fascist movements into historical trends of Bonapartism, imperialism, or anti-Semitism, devoid of the historical specificity and novelty in which these fascist movements arose. Totalitarianism, therefore, is a useful analytical lens insofar the comparative analysis of the complexities and nuance surrounding the overall aims of ideology and the process to achieve these aims within fascist regimes. This is apparent when critically analyzing the totalitarian aspects latent in the ideology, propaganda, and repression implemented in fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. What a snooze fest. I got tired rereading this. And of course, you can replace it with something like, scholars should analyze fascism using totalitarianism as an analytical lens. This is because it allows scholars to explore the complexities of truly fascist movements without making sweeping generalizations. Fascism is a complex topic of discussion and is hard to cover, and yet those two sentences are direct, easy to understand, and captures the essence of the first paragraph. This is what is needed with technical content. The Fire Dancer article was my magnum opus. I can safely say it is one of, if not the best examples of a good technical article that I've written. I'm perpetually shrouded in fear that I'll never write something as good as this in the future. Needless to say, I'm extremely happy with how it came about and how it was received. It took weeks of research and took a lot of careful consideration. There are a few things that really worked with this article technically. My main goal while writing this article was to make it as accessible as possible. Fire Dancer carries profound implications for the future of Solana, and not everyone using Solana is a highly technical user. Even highly technical users have no idea what NUMA awareness architecture is or how to optimize Reed-Solomon coding for network communications. To ensure everyone is able to read this article, I aimed to provide context whenever necessary. For example, I added an entirely optional primer on computer hardware and networking at the very end of the article. This provides the necessary background for talking about concepts such as QUIC and Kevin's argument that the speed of light is too slow. How can you expect anyone to understand the power Fire Dancer is doing with something like FPGAs when they don't understand basic computer hardware? How can you expect someone to understand NUMA awareness architecture or cache locality without this kind of background? By demystifying the complexities of Fire Dancer, this article helps onboard people to Solana, and it's extremely important for the long-term growth and sustainability of the network. It speaks to them directly, avoiding the nonsensical, bullish CT jargon that has little to no substance. It also speaks to readers with a great deal of depth. It's extremely comprehensive. The article covers absolutely anything and everything you need to know about Fire Dancer, from its modular architecture to its security considerations. An article of this scope hadn't existed before. All of the information regarding Fire Dancer was highly fragmented across different talks, blog posts, GitHub repos. I listened to hours of Breakpoint talks, read the various articles released on the Jump blog, and researched the various technical topics to truly understand what was happening. Consolidating all of this information into one article was extremely important to create a point of reference for all those interested. Without this comprehensive resource available, there wouldn't be any real in-depth conversations about Fire Dancer that we could have with the average person. But now we can. The article was therefore highly relevant. It addressed the pertinent question: what is Fire Dancer? People had an idea of it, but didn't really know what it was exactly. Claims circulated that Fire Dancer would raise Solana's TPS to 1 million, and then other claims circulated that'd be 8 million. And only people who had kept up with Fire Dancer would know that these numbers came from very specific tests using FPGAs. The article demystifies these claims and provides the necessary context for truly understanding Fire Dancer, its capabilities, and what it means for Solana's future. The article also highlighted ongoing innovations and developments. Not only is the article designed to inform, but it inherently excites users, developers, investors, and all those interested in Solana on the accessibility, scalability, and security of Solana's future. The article serves as a prime example of what we can constitute as a good resource. The article deliberately avoided jargon whenever possible, and when it wasn't possible, it provided the necessary and relevant explanations to help readers understand better. I had entire sections dedicated to networking processing, Fire Dancer's modular architecture, and C processes before I even attempted to explain NUMA awareness. These longer explanations were necessary to set a knowledge baseline before diving into a more advanced technical concept. In general, I would first explain a new concept, its importance, and then relate it back to Fire Dancer. I'd then build on top of it, explain a more nuanced concept, its importance, and relate it back to Fire Dancer. This process continued so any topic important to Fire Dancer could be understood by the average reader. I easily could have said, Fire Dancer employed NUMA awareness architecture to improve its networking capabilities, and then leave it at that. But that wouldn't have been enough. The sentences themselves are very direct and brief whenever possible. For example, central to Fire Dancer is its modular architecture, which is composed of a number of independent C processes. I use the following paragraph to explain what a process is. A process is an instance of a running program. It is a fundamental component of modern operating systems and represents the execution of a set of instructions. Each process has its own memory space and resources the operating system allocates and operates on, independently of other processes. A process is like an independent worker in a large factory, handling a specific task with their own tools and workspace. It starts with a clear, concise definition, accessible to readers with varying levels of technical knowledge. It uses an analogy to demystify the complexities of a process for the average reader by referencing a familiar scenario. It gives a rounded explanation of what a process is, as well as its role and behavior in computing environments. It provides a comprehensive definition that is very simple, but not to the point of oversimplification. And with all my deep dives, I don't intend for readers to start from the beginning all the way to the end. Yes, all of my articles follow a logical flow, so a reader can sit there and go from start to finish. However, it isn't reasonable to expect every reader to do this, especially when these articles can be very, very long. I design all of my articles so that sections can stand alone. This way, complex topics are broken down into smaller, manageable sections that anyone can jump directly into and learn about. Not only does it make it easier to manage content, it also allows users to find the exact information they need as seamlessly as possible. And to get to this point, I had quite a few people reviewing my article regarding content. A big thank you to the Fire Dancer team. With their revisions, I ensured that the article was accurate, up to date, and covered all the complexities of their client. I had to constantly revise and rewrite to get to the final product. It's important to note that I couldn't do this alone. I didn't write this article alone, and I don't want to give the false impression that I did. I had the help of all my reviewers and tools such as Grammarly. Every article I've ever written has gone through some sort of review process where multiple people look it over and I make the necessary revisions. You need to be open-minded and iterate based on feedback. What may be clear to you may not be clear to others. So, what can we take away from this? Sure, Orwell had a bunch of rules you should and sometimes shouldn't follow, and the Fire Dancer article was pretty cool. But how can I apply this to my own technical writing? There are a few clear takeaways to improve your technical writing. Embrace clarity above all. Make your writing as clear as possible. Avoid jargon where you can, and when you can't, take the time to explain it. The goal is to illuminate, not confuse. Break down complex topics into smaller, manageable sections that can stand alone or be part of a larger document. Prioritize the user in your documentation. Every piece of technical writing serves an end user, whether that's a developer trying to implement a feature or an investor trying to understand a project's value. Keep this in mind. Constantly ask yourself, can my target reader understand and use this information effectively? Use analogies and examples. Analogies like comparing a process to an independent worker in a large factory can help break down complex ideas. Examples provide concrete understanding. So use analogies and examples liberally to enhance comprehension whenever possible. Get feedback. Peer review and collaboration are crucial for producing good technical content. Seek feedback from technical and non-technical peers, mentors, intended readers, etc. This feedback is invaluable for identifying areas that may need clarification, simplification, or expansion. Also, brevity is key. Be as concise as possible without sacrificing clarity. And finally, keep learning. If you're not learning something, you're probably dead. Read more. The blockchain space constantly evolves with new technologies, best practices, and standards emerging regularly. It often feels like decades of innovation occur in a matter of days. Stay informed, read every day, and adapt your writing to reflect the latest developments. Remember that technical writing is as much an art as a science. Even Orwell stated, "Break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous." Find a balance between detail and accessibility, complexity and simplicity. Continuously refine your approach and embrace these principles. Iterate, iterate, iterate. Technical writing is invaluable to the blockchain space. We're talking about the future of social coordination. We're building the future of finance, the future of governance, the future of real estate, the future of gaming. And we are at the cusp of this technological revolution. Don't make documentation or educational resources sound monotonous. You could have a revolutionary idea, but nobody will be interested if they can't understand what you're trying to say. This is supposed to be exciting and fun. Technical writing is not just about documentation. It's about democratizing access to knowledge, fostering innovation, and building communities. Technical writing is a cornerstone of community building. By creating content that's accessible and engaging, we invite more individuals into the conversation. We need to create more good technical content to act as points of reference. Whether it's improving documentation, writing a blog post, or simply explaining a complex concept in simple terms for a Twitter thread, your efforts make a difference. Together, we can create clear, more engaging, and technical content that propels Solana forward. Thank you.